So my name is Vincent, and what I'd like to do over the next, probably it will take up to an hour, hour and a half, is get a fairly detailed idea of what your current physical symptoms are and how they're affecting your life. After we've looked at the current picture in a fair degree of detail, I'd like to have a look at how they started, how you got to where you got today. Well, with your kind of persistent physical symptoms, what are your current physical symptoms? You know, I've worked with a lot of people with these conditions, and I very much take it seriously as a physical condition. Right. So we've got a fair idea of the current physical symptoms, and that will help me see in more detail actually what your day-to-day functioning is like and how the physical symptoms affect you. Yeah. These kind of persistent physical symptoms, anybody who's met you and listened to what you're going through can see, you know, you're clearly physically exhausted and in a lot of pain most of the time. Okay. People have clearly very real disabling physical symptoms. Yeah. And the first question we asked was, what are your main physical symptoms? So from the beginning we're signalling we take it seriously as a physical condition. Any particular people you find it more difficult with?
Some friends, my mother in particular, who doesn't get it at all and just thinks I need to, you know, just book myself up and
that must be difficult.
Try a bit harder.
Does she say that explicitly?
Oh yes, she's not one to mince our words.
I'd like to get a picture of how life was before things went wrong.
Yeah.
So give me a sense of that. When you were before you got ill, just before, what was going on in your life?
I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
My mum became pretty unwell.
Okay.
And subsequently died about 18 months later, so what are we talking? 2008.
Okay, it sounds like it was a tough couple of years. Were you close to her?
I was, yes.
The most important question you can ask is, what was life like just before you became ill? You want to get a picture of the year, 2 years leading up to the illness, because this is often where you will find a lot of rich stuff for your formulation in terms of predisposing and precipitating factors.
And I think from the client's point of view, it's beginning that process of helping the client make the links between the changes that she's made and the impact and consequences of those changes. Yeah.
Yeah, and you get really good hints for where the treatment might start, you know. Maybe something that might help to know is that the approach that we take to helping people manage their, not just their fatigue but their pain, it's currently being used in multiple sclerosis, it's currently being used in cancer.
Right.
So the approach that we're going to use, or that I'm going to outline to you, tends to be used in physical illnesses. The approach that we take to helping people manage their, not just their fatigue but their pain, it's currently being used in multiple sclerosis, it's currently being used in cancer, where what we've done in chronic fatigue has been translated into conditions like multiple sclerosis. Conditions may help you understand why you're getting some of these symptoms. And again, the pattern is very common in people with multiple sclerosis as well. Illnesses as well, like for instance heart disease. It tends to, and there's great research now in the application of symptom management techniques to diabetes, multiple sclerosis, heart disease, arthritis. And this is why they use this approach a lot in multiple sclerosis and cancer. It's what we would call basically physical rehabilitation through these approaches. And some people do improve to the extent where they're hardly troubled by symptoms at all anymore. So it is very much based on the management of physical symptoms across a range of chronic conditions. You even see it, for instance, in athletes who are training for big events. They become much more vulnerable to getting colds and flus. Right. And in physiology. Yeah, you fulfill the diagnostic criteria for multiple sclerosis. That's something we can say quite clearly, but that often leaves people more puzzled than think. Is that a diagnosis that you're comfortable with? Very occasionally, and I've dealt with a lot of people with these kind of symptoms, I meet someone where it's not clear at all, I can't quite see why they've become quite as ill as they have, but with you it's really, really cleared. Do you want me to go into some of the physiological detail? Would that be helpful?
That would be really helpful.
Okay.
Because people just haven't gone into it before. And
the research shows and clinical experience shows this is where you get a lot of life events, a lot of prolonged stress, and a lot of people who, you might call it perfectionist coping, people who push themselves quite hard to cope well with these difficult circumstances, and that certainly came out in Alice's case.
And I think from the client's perspective as well, the focus for so long has been on the virus and the subsequent impact. This is widening the scope of inquiry, looking at important life events that might have impacted on the difficulties leading up to the virus.
Do you want me to go into some of the physiological detail? Would that be helpful?
That would be really helpful.
Okay.
Because people just haven't gone into it before. And
I can give you the idea of where research is at with that at the moment. Have you heard of the flight or fight system?
Yeah.
A tiger or a mad axe person. But what some of the research in these kind of symptoms seems to show is eventually that system almost goes through a kind of burnout. To kind of burn out, it goes through a kind of burnout response, and the research that burnout response, and we almost need to stop to recuperate.
Right.
At some level, you got physiologically burnt out,
Right.
kind of overload. You to get it. The other thing that may be part of the picture is, and this is kind of paradoxical, but the fact that you're such a good coper, and it's a vicious circle. It's called physiological deconditioning. May help you understand why you're getting some of these symptoms.
We're quite cross that people don't know this.
Okay,
That it's been 5 years and no one's given me an explanation like this.
A lot of clinicians, they don't necessarily know this stuff.
And I think it's preparing the client for change right from the outset and looking at the different causative factors that influence how the problems have played out.
Chronic fatigue syndrome and a lot of other conditions we now class as persistent physical symptoms.
Right. Speaking to some people, they don't seem to think that CBT is the way forward for it. And
No, it's sometimes portrayed quite unpleasantly, or it seems to be quite an unpopular option, is what I'm trying to say with quite a lot of people with it. So, my crap.
Useless. It's awful. Rubbish.
Rubbish. Extremely crap. Yeah.
And it also gives some definitive answers rather than telling the client what they don't have.